Welcome to this edition of Talking Outdoors. My name is Rami Rasamny, and today we are talking about the Chamonix to Zermatt Haute Route expedition. So the question is, what is the Chamonix to Zermatt Haute Route expedition? Well, there are actually many versions of this trip. The trip that we are talking about is actually the Summer Mountaineers Haute Route. That means it is the glacier traverse that crosses between Chamonix, so at the foot of the Mont Blanc, and Zermatt, which is the foot of the Matterhorn. Two other versions of this trip. There is the Trekkers Haute Route, which is the trekking trail that links Chamonix to Zermatt, which is a lower altitude trail that does not go onto the glacier. And there is also the ski touring route between Chamonix and Zermatt, which, as the name suggests, is the ski touring route between Chamonix and Zermatt. But for the purpose of this trip specifically, we're talking about the Mountaineers Haute Route summer expedition. So how does a day look like on the Chamonix to Zermatt expedition? A typical day actually starts pretty early in the morning. We try to get out on the glacier while the glacier is still solid. Remember, it's the summer months, right? So the further we go into the day, the weaker the glacier becomes because normally the sun would hit it and the ground would warm up. So we would start to try and get an early move, typically around 5 o'clock in the morning. In some instances, depending on the length of the day, we may start even a little bit earlier than that. We normally start at the Albert Premier hut. That would be the first day onto the glacier. And there we do start early. We try to make a move around between 3 and 4 a.m. in order to traverse up to the high point, which is the Grand Col de Tours, before descending on the Triangle Glacier. We try to be done with the glacier typically by 1 p.m. So we do start early, but then the afternoons tend to be fairly more relaxed. We tend to arrive quite early as well, usually between 2 to 3 p.m., sometimes 4, depending on the day, but we do try to arrive as early as possible, and that gives us time to recover, to rest, and relax. Every day on this trail is either a mountain hut or a small hotel along the route. So we do usually start and end in a mountain hut, which is super nice. And that's actually one of the big charms of this experience, is to be in this remote area. Even when you're climbing big summits like the Mont Blanc, you don't get to have that experience of being away from the road, away from the village, away from any kind of civilization, quite in the same way that you do during the trail of the Haute Route. Here we do really get quite remote, and that's what makes this quite special. So that's a typical day. We also take lunch. Usually we have lunch as the picnic lunch along the trail. Typically it'll be towards the middle of the day, or maybe a little bit earlier than noon, usually after we achieve the highest point or the most challenging part of the day. And then dinner would normally be at the mountain hut, and then an early breakfast the next day, and repeat. The only 2 days that are quite different would be the very first day of the experience, which is when we trek to the Albert Premier. This is a half day. It typically takes around 3 to 4 hours, and that just gets us up to the hut. And then it's a pretty chilled out day. We usually take advantage of the day as well to get some crampon techniques right, go over some of the basics, refresh our minds about some of the basics of mountaineering and alpinism. And then, of course, the last day, which is also a trek from the Schönbiel hut down to Zermatt, also quite a short day, and that gives us an opportunity to enjoy Zermatt at the foot of the Matterhorn, and enjoy the spectacular Swiss alpine village. So the question is, are there any requirements or prior experience for this trip? The short answer is that for this trip and the way that we run it at Life Happens Outdoors, you don't require any prior technical knowledge, because we include the technical knowledge and experience and training as part of the initial stages of this experience. So on the very first day on the glacier, we're going to be dedicating it entirely to learning the basics of how to walk with the crampons, how to walk with the ice axe, how to be in a rope party. And during the Chamonix to Zermatt Haute Route expedition, the grade of the alpine element or the mountaineering elements are quite limited. So here it's mostly, the challenge is mostly derived from the length of the glaciers and the big traverses that we're doing, more than it is about the steepness or the exposure on the glacier itself. Although there are some sections that are quite impressive. But at the same time, what we would always recommend is that you do have some kind of experience in at least trekking. And if you have any doubt, there is the Introduction to Alpine Mountaineering course, which we always run. You can reach out to us about that. And that would put you on a comfortable footing to really enjoy this experience. So the question is about the fitness level required for this adventure. The Zermatt Haute Route expedition is a big achievement. It's a big physical achievement. In the sense that we're going to be doing long days with technical equipment and a somewhat full backpack. And we're going to be using technical equipment, which means that physically it's more challenging, because walking with the crampons is more challenging than walking just with the regular trekking boots. So in this sense, I would say that it is an experience that requires a good degree of physical fitness in order to enjoy it. I think a strong focus on cardiovascular health, being capable of doing any cardio that you have nearby to your place, but swimming, running, going up the stairs, any kind of cardio that can really get that heart rate going up a little bit, and put you in that position where you need to be in a stress position for longer periods of time, I would say would be very beneficial to you. A typical profile of somebody who I would find would enjoy this experience the most would be somebody who already does at least 3 days of personal training, whether it's sports, playing football, doing whatever it is at home, but at least 3 days of some kind of sports, gym or whatever, already in your daily life and already to the warm up to this trip slightly by turning that up around 10 to 15% in the lead up to this experience. So we have a question here about temperature and weather and what that's like. Of course, this depends vastly on the weather conditions of the week. This is the Alps at the end of the day, and we do have days where it's shorts. You can't be in shorts on the glacier, but it does feel like it's a shorts and t-shirt weather. But then equally, maybe the next day, we get some cloud cover, maybe we get a little bit of weather, and then temperatures can drop to negative, and it can be very, very cold. So you have to imagine that temperatures can fluctuate anywhere between the kind of 10s, more or less. Sometimes the low 10s would be pretty typical, and then all the way down to below zero. Of course, in the earlier hours of the day, it'll be colder, and the later hours, and then of course around the middle of the day, it'll tend to be quite warm. So that's what you can expect in terms of overall weather. But stick to the gear list. If you're joining one of our trips, we provide you with a guidebook that has a very particular and specific gear list that has exactly what you need, both in terms of what it is that you actually need, but also in terms of quantities of each item that you need to bring with you to be efficient, because ultimately we have to pack all of these things and carry them with us. So it's very important that you stick to the gear list, and you will have everything you need for every eventuality. So we have a question about accommodation and what that's like on the trail. So with Life Happens Outdoors, we always start our experience and end our experience in hotels. For us, our base camp for this trip is Chamonix. So we'll be using our hotel in Chamonix at the start and end of this experience. But during the actual Haute Route expedition, we'll be staying in mountain huts. For those of us who've never been to the Alps or aren't familiar with the mountain hut system, mountain huts are basically accommodation that have been built into the mountain or on the mountain, that are designed specifically to accommodate expeditioneers, alpinists, climbers, and people going up to the high mountains. These huts usually consist of beds that are basically bunk beds. So it's just big rooms with lots of bunk beds, one next to the other. They're pretty well kept, especially for those of us who've been climbing elsewhere, not in the Alps. We'll find that we're always very pleasantly surprised by what's available. The huts also have a common area, typically a bar area. They serve hot food in the accommodation as well. There are indoor toilets in some of our lodges as well. There's the potential to have a shower. So it's relatively comfortable given where we are, because some of these huts are built in outrageous places, and I'm thinking off the top of my head like the Bertol, which is actually on the top of a shard that we have to ascend 100 meters of ladder to actually enter. So given where these places are, it's very, very surprising how comfortable they can be. But we also have to understand that this is a mountaineering expedition. These places are remote, so we will be sharing accommodation in mixed gender accommodation throughout the entire climbing portion of this trip, and there would be no real possibility of segregation if that's something that's concerning for any of you. But then also you have to imagine that these are like, everybody there is an alpinist. Everybody's there just to put their head on the pillow, sleep, wake up, be efficient. So you know, you're in that kind of vibe generally throughout the entire experience. So the question is about single accommodation. So kind of following through on the previous question, I would say, so with Life Happens Outdoors, during the hotel stays, so that's your first night and last night at the beginning and end of the expedition, single room is possible. Of course, in the mountain huts, there are no single rooms. It is very, very rare to find single rooms in mountain huts, and they are simply not available on the Chamonix to Zermatt Haute Route, in any of the accommodation that we use on the Chamonix Zermatt Haute Route. So we will have to share during that portion. So the question is about altitude sickness and whether or not this is a concern. Of course, at any point where we are nearing or above 3,000 meters, altitude does become something that we think about. We barely touch 3,000 meters on this expedition. I believe the highest point is around 3,400, and it's a kind of touch and go scenario. So we're just there and then we drop back down. I would say that altitude is not a major factor on this expedition, especially because of the schedule of the climb itself. So it follows the schedule of trekking high or climbing high and then sleeping low. So an example of that would be, we would start at the Albert Premier hut, which is just around 2,000 meters. We get up to the high point the next day of Grand Col de Tour, but then we sleep all the way down in Mont Voisin, which is actually almost 700 meters, so it's very low down. Next day we climb up a little bit to Chariot hut, which is typically, which is not very high up, and I think it's a 300 meter vertical gain. Then we go to the Vignette where we're much higher. So once we get into the cycle of the first 2 days, the acclimatization schedule that's naturally built into this trek means that it is a marginal concern. It is not the same kind of concern that we would have if we were going to the Mont Blanc at 4,800 or Kilimanjaro, for example. It would not be this. It doesn't live in the same space. So the question is about whether we need technical equipment for this experience. The answer is yes. In order to be able to get onto the glacier, you are going to be required to have a helmet, a harness, ice axe, crampons, mountaineering graded boots, and of course then the other bits of material like the hard shell and the other gear items that are in the gear list. What I would say is stick to the gear list as closely as possible. For those of us who don't have technical equipment, and I understand typically for people who are joining on this kind of trip, you wouldn't necessarily have any of those just yet. What I would recommend is to rent. In fact, I would actually, if you don't have any technical equipment, I would invite you to rent rather than buy, because equipment has become so hyper specialized that even, for example, say boots. There are certain boots that would be perfect on the Chamonix Zermatt that would not work well if you're going to say Aconcagua or maybe do a more technical climb for the Mont Blanc, or maybe do a less technical climb. So I would say rent, especially if these are one of your first alpine experiences. And then once you have an idea of your trajectory, where you want to go with your climbing, then you can actually purchase what would be best for your own trajectory. But of course, if you have experience and you have your own equipment, definitely bring those and reach out to us if you're joining our trip, and let us know what you have in terms of boots, crampons, etc. And we can advise you as to whether or not they're appropriate for this expedition. So the question is about the size of the backpack and how we fit everything in. So we at Life Happens Outdoors recommend no bigger than a 30-liter backpack, which on the face of it is quite big, but then once you come to start to actually pack your things, especially for those of us who are packing our sacks for the first time, it might feel like it's a bit small. If you stick to the items on the gear list, everything will fit. We've been doing this trip for years, and we always get the same feedback before people show up. They go, oh, how are we going to fit all of this? How are we going to get, the down jacket into the backpack, or the technical equipment into the backpack? Don't worry about all of these things. What I would say is bring everything on the gear list with your 30-liter backpack, and then once you're there, your team leader and guide will show you how to pack your bags so that it's efficient, it has everything that you need, and you're ready for the mountain. The problem with getting a bigger bag is that inevitably we will start to overpack. And for an expedition that is as long, because we're exposed for a long period of time on this trip, as the Chamonix Zermatt, what ends up happening is that even if you are 1 kilo more than what you should be carrying, that extra kilo will start to take its toll on you day after day and climb after climb, until finally you'll find that you're far less capable or far less comfortable than everybody else who's stuck to the gear list. So my answer is bring a 30-liter backpack, stick to the gear list, and don't worry about not being able to fit it all when you're at home. Once you arrive, we're going to take care of it, and we'll show you how to do it. So question about internet and what that situation is like. Most of the time there is no Wi-Fi in most of the mountain huts, and that's kind of more of a statement than anything else, because there are Wi-Fi points in other places and other mountain huts across the region, but I guess in this particular section, the French and the Swiss parts of this section of the Alps, they've still kind of taken a stand. That might change, and it might have changed even at the time of recording, but up until last season, there was still very limited connectivity in the mountain huts. Having said that, there's pretty strong connectivity for the first and second day. You'll always have, and actually third day as well. So that would be first day in Chamonix, where we have our Wi-Fi connection already. Second day at the Albert Premier, where we have also the pretty good, strong cellular connection. And then the next day in Montvoisin, so that's already 3 days of this experience where we're pretty well covered. And it starts to become a little bit sketchy once we get to Chanrion Hut and then Vignette and Berthold. That's where I think we'll have about 3 days where connectivity is fairly limited. It is still possible to get some cellular coverage, but if there's any kind of weather, it becomes increasingly difficult. And then once we're in Schönbiel and we start to head down to Zermatt, we're back on the grid again, and we are connected. So really, I would say it's a concern for 3 days on this experience. But even then, it's like we're talking about intermittent disconnection, not a complete blackout. So charging devices and power banks, usually throughout the entire trip, we will have access to some kind of charging port. In most of the places, the charging ports are in the common area. So as long as the common area is still open, which normally stays open until just after dinner, you can charge your power banks, you can charge your phones directly. There would be an area. In some cases, they do charge for it, but it's normally quite a nominal sum. But for the most part, you can charge for free. And we'll have access to that every single day. So I cannot conceive of any day along the route that we take in which we won't have access to some kind of charging facility. And what we would recommend is, of course, charge your power banks first because they'll last longer, and then charge anything extra if you have time. But because what you can do then is charge whatever you need, cameras, phones, etc., using the power bank rather than relying on each individual thing to be charged. But yeah, typically one power bank that can do 4 or 5 fills for a phone is usually more than enough for this experience between charging opportunities. So the question is whether regular insurance covers mountaineering. The answer is it depends entirely on your policy. If your health or travel policy already covers outdoor activities, you would need to also make sure that it covers mountaineering specifically, because that's usually in a category on its own. Although, and two things just to keep in mind about this. So it's the activity and it's the altitude. Most insurance covers up to a certain altitude, and they cover up to a certain number of adventure activities. So it's important for you to check to make sure that your insurance covers you up to 3,500, which I believe is the high point on this trip, and also covers you in terms of your the activities that we're going to be doing. If not, there are many insurance providers out there that do specific insurance for these kinds of trips, and they're generally quite affordable, and actually you can probably get them as part of a travel package as well. If you need any advice on that, you could just reach out to us, and we've got partners out there that who can help you. So we have a question about exiting the itinerary prematurely and what the situation would be like in that event. So of course it depends entirely on the scenario, but I'll highlight a couple that are kind of the typical things that happen. So in one instance, it might be the case that we just get a terrible weather window. It's really not looking good, and we're just basically going to be spending all of our time in the hut waiting for the weather to clear up. In that case, that would be a change of itinerary for the entire group. For Life Happens Outdoors, what we do is we will deviate the itinerary in order to try and pursue the best possible outcome for the week that we have. So if the Chamonix Zermatt Haute Route expedition is not possible because of weather or other circumstances, we would try to tweak and change to the best of our ability, maybe even exit and try to climb something else or climb somewhere else in order to give you the best possible week that's available under the circumstances. And we've done this before. So once we moved all the way over to Italy, we did some climbing of the Breithorn and some of the summits of the Spaghetti Tour where the situation was a little bit better. And other times we actually went in reverse and we started in Zermatt and moved with the weather that was more favorable. So we are quite flexible in this regard, and we'll do whatever it takes in order to make sure that you have the best possible week under the circumstances. At the end of the day, adventure and mountaineering in particular are contingent on the weather, and there's nothing we can do about that. But what happens if it's an individual in the group who has circumstances that may require them to depart from the itinerary? Well, we would make contingencies for that, and those contingencies would depend on where we are within the itinerary. So if we're staying at any of the accommodation that has road access, and by that I mean whether we're in Chamonix, whether we're in Zermatt, whether we're in potentially Mauvoisin or Charion, then that would be an easy fix. We would be able to arrange for a departure by road back to Chamonix. If there was another situation where potentially we could be somewhere else in the mountain, then we would discuss with the guardian, discuss with the guide and the team leader about what would be the most efficient way to bring this individual down in a way that doesn't affect the movement of the rest of the group. And this is something that we plan for. This is something that we would take charge of, and we don't want you to worry about that. If circumstances arise in which you have to exit, we will figure it out for you at that point in time based on where we are and what we need to do in order to make that happen for you safely. So the question is, what makes the Chamonix Zermatt so special for me? I would normally defer this one to my wife because this is her favorite of the Life Happens Outdoors adventure experiences. In fact, it is one of the few expeditions in the Alps in which you are fully detached from the, the kind of first world city, bustling road lights, highways, because even when you're climbing the Mont Blanc, you can still see Geneva, on the horizon. You can still see the highway that comes down from Annecy, just beneath the mountain hut, that reaches Saint-Gervais and ultimately to Chamonix. So there's always this feeling that you are close to something when you're climbing in the Alps. But when you do the Chamonix to Zermatt Haute Route, you really do get away from those exits, from that sense of, oh, I'm actually nearby to industrial Europe. No, here you are on glaciers where you really don't see anything except the towering peaks above you, the glaciers out in front of you, the huge seracs, the huge ice falls. It's really quite special in that regard, I would say. You also cover distances, and that's really what's amazing here. It's that you're starting in Chamonix, where we're in the hub of French alpine life, and we cross into the foothills of places like the Grand Combin, which is an entirely different massif. We cross into the foothills, not even the foothills. I say foothills, but I mean like beneath the summits, practically, of places like Arola, the Pignes d'Arola, of some of the most beautiful mountains. Of course, the Matterhorn, the Dent d'Herens, the Dent Blanche. These are all huge summits that we're just moving in between them. And that's something that you don't get on any other experience in the Alps. I don't think so. It is that. And then also it's coupled with the fact that it's relatively comfortable in the mountain huts. The acclimatization schedule is really well thought through. The access to be able to exit is still within reach. It isn't something that requires too much in the way of thinking. So I would say that, and then also it's a huge achievement. It's a gigantic achievement to cross the Alpine glaciers from Chamonix to Zermatt. So all of this makes it really something special. And then finally, you get to have fondue in Zermatt, and that's the cherry on top of it all. So this is one of those experiences that I would say is a no-brainer for anybody who's looking to do something different in the Alps that isn't super focused on summit, but actually wants to have that immersive, full, transformative, remote experience. And I think that only the Chamonix de Zermatt Haute Route expedition really gives all of that in one trip.